These are two Henredon side tables. Henredon find them from $1,000 to $3,000 if they're in great condition, and these are in merely okay condition. I intend to change that, and I'm gonna slowly progress into more and more time-consuming ways to do that. First, we'll look at where we have troublesome spots. I'm gonna start with the tops. That's where my real concern is. So I'm gonna sand down with 220. This is gonna be a veneer piece, so I'm concerned about sanding it down. But when I wipe it back, it does not look any better, and I am concerned. Restore finish, I'm asking too much of. The Restore finish is a great product. This is gonna be in a dark walnut, but this is not the level at which you should be using it. You want it for more minor issues. I went ahead and put a coat of Restore finish on everything with plain rags, and the fronts look pretty good with a couple of exceptions. The places where it's really not designed to be able to fix, it did not fix. Imagine that. The sides have some scuff marks. I'm going to use some furniture camouflage markers to try to improve that and see what I can do on the top, though it's also not what those markers are for, and it looks terrible when I'm done on the top. The places on the side where it had some issues turned out pretty good, and then also a few places on the front I improved the condition, but the top is still just, oh, it's so bad. It's just getting worse. So I'm going to try it again with Restore Finish, Dark Walnut, and 4/0 Steel Wool. Let's see if maybe that can get us somewhere. I put on my gloves, and I have options of dark walnut and one other that's closer to a medium brown I don't end up using. The steel wool with dark walnut goes on, and I focus on the two main areas of concern on this one side table, the white ring and whatever else is somewhere in the center. But I put the product all over the entirety of the top to begin with. This takes a while, and the 4/0 steel wool gives me hope that it can get deeper. Wiping it off, I don't think I'm any closer to getting it better. So I do it on the other piece as well, just for uniformity's sake, and also I'm no closer to improving the situation. So I'm going to take a Varathane stain and put the stain on the specific areas of concern, then spreading it out a little so that if it does take to the piece, which with that film on is not very likely, that it'll look a little more uniform. It doesn't affect the areas that have not been sanded down at all as I wipe them back, and I try to pinpoint the areas of concern to just let it sit on those areas for a while and see if it can do a job it was never meant to. And no, it cannot do the job it was never meant to. I've spent a lot of time. I'm going to water these down and lay them flat to dry so they're not a fire hazard, and I'm going to come back to this, starting with the hardware. I'm going to remove the hardware on all four pieces. I realize I have the wrong bit pretty early on, so I have to change that out so I'm not stripping the screws. I did actually strip one. I go and get my options, find the correct one, and remove the remainder of the hardware. It's 4 drawers, really good looking hardware. It's definitely mid-century modern vibes, and if I can clean it up well, that'd be wonderful. So I'm gonna see what I can do with those pieces, and a cleaner that you might be familiar with that's pretty popular, and it's called Barkeeper's Friend. So I take those pieces to the sink and I break out the Barkeeper's Friend, which has helped me repeatedly. Each one of these I wet, I use a toothbrush to scrub down, and it looks like they're improving some, but then there are marks where it's part of the finish has come off. I cannot improve that. I cannot improve that. There's another one I cannot improve. Here is yet another one that I cannot improve any further, and another one. So all 4 of those look slightly better, but not by a lot. Maybe I'll paint them. I don't know. Back to the tops of these poor Henredon fine furniture pieces that I have spent so much time not getting right. I look at the major areas of concern, that white circle. I'm going to try out this ryobi. I just got it. I'm excited about that, but I forgot to clean the top. So I put down the ryobi and I break out some Dawn because I need to clean off all that Restor finish I put on it. And the Dawn, then some water with a sponge. I scrub it down on both of the tops, come back, wipe it back to get most of the suds off, and then I spray it down with water again. And what I like to do on large surfaces is use a squeegee. The squeegee gets most of it off right after, and then I just wipe it down. I find that to be pretty easy. Back to the ryobi, I start sanding, I put on my mask. What's being kicked up is part of what they put on for mass manufacturing. I'm concerned about the veneer and how thin it is, but in hindsight, I think it might be thicker than I thought, or at least the 220 is not as dangerous as I thought. I don't blow through it, which is good. I really try to focus on that ring because it is my enemy at this point in time. I spent a lot of time trying to sand that out or sand it to something that doesn't look like a ring anymore, but I do not find a lot of success in it. I kick up a lot of white dust, water comes out again, wiping it down again, going to the second piece that I had sanded, watering it down again, wiping it back. You'd think this is my favorite thing, is to put water on things, then wipe them off. And that's okay. I'm learning that I'm not doing it right. So I break out this Kobalt furniture scraper. It's got a fine scraping side and a rough scraping side. I've never used one before. So starting out, I'm pretty delicate, a little nervous about what I'm doing. I get a little bit more aggressive and feel slightly more confident as I'm moving forward. I really focus on that white ring and get to a point finally where I feel like I may be able to get stain to it and that I've gotten enough of the top white finish off, which shows itself there on the piece. Watering down again, wiping down again. I'm gonna do it. I do use the ryobi on the bottom of each piece, the side of each piece, where there's some minor damage. I hope to stain those areas that I'm sanding off the minor damage so that it will just kind of blend in and make the piece all that much better. Wiping it down again, watering it, wiping it down again. The next step is gonna be a wood stain in jacobean. But first I'm gonna want to add back the hardware that I had removed. This was the original hardware and I'd cleaned it. I have to admit that cleaning it didn't really seem to do a whole lot in the way of improving how good it looked. The furniture, though it's well made, came with some hardware. Oh, here we are at Jacobean coming up. It's oil based, and so I want to make sure that I'm protected, both my skin and my face. I'm in the garage, well ventilated, and when I put this on, I am hopeful that the places I have scraped down to raw wood are going to allow me to have this oil-based stain go on, and then the places that I did not scrape down will hopefully be able to take on some of the stain for uniformity's sake. Spoiler alert, this is not going to work. This is, I don't want to say a waste of time, but it will not accomplish anything other than teaching me that this is not going to work. Partly the way the wood is protected by the manufacturer is so well done that getting an oil to soak into the wood that has layer after layer after layer of protection is really asking too much of the oil. So I've asked too much of Restore Finish, I've asked too much of this oil-based stain, and soon enough I'm going to find out what product will work that I'm not asking too much of. I don't regret that much going through all these steps in advance because I learned a lot and I had suspicions as I was doing it that this was going to happen. See, nothing. There's nothing that happened there. That didn't work at all. And I I got to confirm my suspicions. So I won't call it a waste, but it didn't work. I'm going to water down these rags that I'll lay to dry out to help prevent fire hazard. Now I'm gonna, after a few days of it drying, because it didn't work, oil-based stain needs to dry for a few days before you can add a water-based anything on top. After I let it dry for a few days, I have some fuel here that I'm going to pour onto a rag and I'm going to wipe it down. That will make sure that any oil that didn't dry, that still remains on the surface, is removed so that I can move on to what's going to be the step that actually works, which will be a water-based stain and poly combo. So this fuel I wipe onto the surfaces where I put the stain, and then I go outside. I have shellac, Zinsser bin shellac. I'm gonna wipe everything down with my favorite formula, H2O, and some water one more time before I coat both of the tops in shellac. And after I allow them to dry for a little bit, I will come back and do another coat of shellac. This will create a barrier between what oil may be there and the water-based stain and poly that I'm going to be using, which is coming up right here. I see it pictured right there. As you can tell, what I did made no real dent in, so let's assume we're basically starting from right here. I have 400 grit sandpaper. I'm just smoothing out the shellac well enough for it to feel comfortable to the touch and help with the mechanical bonding of the next part, which will be, as I said, the water-based poly and stain combo, which is essentially a clear water-based polyurethane with some dye in it. Now I put my hair up. I try to make sure the area around me doesn't have hazards for spilling. I stir it well because they say pigment can get at the bottom. I haven't found that to be true with water-based stain and poly, but it could be. The rest of this process is so arduous. I'm amazed at how arduous it is to have polyurethane work well as a protective cover. You really want to have thin coats put on and allow adequate dry time in between. So here you can see the place where there was the ring from the dish or whatever with a coffee cup looks a little better, but only a little better. So we are at the beginning of a long, arduous process here. This other side table has fewer issues, but they're still there. And so I'm applying a thin coat of this polyurethane that I'm then feathering out, and I will do this again and again for as long as it takes. We're now at the beginning of what's going to be about a 5-minute process that will be me repeatedly putting thin coats of this polyurethane and stain combination onto the piece where the damage has been done in an effort to camouflage it. I'm really happy to report that my efforts are going to work. It's going to be beautiful at the end. And if you'd like to skip ahead 5 minutes because you don't want to see the process, that's okay. You can just know that I'm putting on thin layer after thin layer and waiting in between. So we're going to have a few costume changes because time has to pass. I'm going to use part of that time, if you don't want to skip ahead, to tell you about shellac because I think it's really fascinating and it matters a lot to people that are in the furniture flipping industry. It matters to all of us really, but it's interesting. So here we go. Shellac is it's a resin that's secreted by a lac bug. It's a female bug only that secretes it, and that bug is on trees in the forests of India and also Thailand. It's mainly several different acids as well as some natural waxes. The way that it's processed is it's sold as flakes that are then dissolved into alcohol, which make liquid shellac. That's what I'm using here. And that liquid shellac is used to brush on as a wood finish. It can also be used as a food glaze. And it's a natural primer. It's pretty tough as a natural primer. It's really good for acting as a tannin blocker, which is where you're going to see most woodworkers or furniture flippers using it because the wood tannins can come through. If you want to paint a piece white, you need to make sure that it's protected from that kind of the leaching through the paint when it's lighter. It doesn't show up so much when it's darker, but because the wood tannins can come through and just destroy a white piece that's been painted, shellac is incredibly important for people that want to flip furniture, especially if they want to have that furniture be lighter. So it's great as a tannin blocker. It also works as an odor blocker and can be a high gloss varnish. It used to be used in electrical applications because it has really good insulation qualities and it seals out moisture. Phonographs and like gramophone records were made of shellac, but eventually they were replaced by vinyl. By 1948, shellac wasn't used to make any records. We were at vinyl by that point. Um, from the time shellac replaced oil and wax finishes in the 19th century, it became one of the most dominant wood finishes in the Western world until lacquer, which came around in the 1920s and 30s. And I can tell you a little bit about that another few minutes where I could talk about lacquer, which is really fascinating and maybe not as applicable to what you're going to want to do as shellac may be, but it's part of our history in furniture. And so it's nice to know. Lacquer, usually shiny, it's a finish that's applied to wood and made from resin as well. It's been around for thousands of years and dominated the market for a really long time. It's durable, it's waterproof, it feels good, it looks good. Asian lacquer is often what we call it, and those can be painted with pictures or carved. In modern day techniques, when we're talking about lacquer, we're talking about clear coatings that dry by solvent evaporation for the most part. So when I talked about mechanical adhesion, when I was sanding the shellac for me to put a new coat on, the mechanical adhesion is like it will stick to the surface that I've sanded. Shellac has an interesting difference in that it has chemical adhesion. So it essentially melts into the coating of shellac, sorry, the coating of lacquer underneath it, which means the finish can last for a really long time. We have pieces that are thousands of years old and still look pretty fantastic. In India, in Asia, we found some really beautiful pieces that are well protected because lacquers are hard finishes, they're durable finishes, they're beautiful, they resist damage, abrasion. They're amazing, but they have problems. Among those problems is they take a really long time to dry. Also, the conditions under which you have to have them to dry are kind of specific. It needs to be warm, it needs to be humid. We found some things with crushed shellfish that could help. I won't go into that, but the biggest concern at this point in our history, I think, is the environmental impact that lacquer has. And for now, what we've learned is that solvent-based lacquers, which are what we know about as the historical, that's kind of the precedent that has been set, have well, there are environmental concerns that we need to address. And they dry very quickly, they're incredibly viscous. The conditions under which they have to be used are really specific. And so, for an individual that's trying to refinish furniture, it's unrealistic to use lacquer. We've since developed water based lacquers for the environment and for health concerns that work really well. I mean, they're not, maybe it's not going to last 3,000 plus years, but they're less toxic and the environment is more into them. And often it's fine. The results they produce are kind of fine. The fumes are less hazardous and are not as likely to create fire, which is cool. There's still some issues with it, and one of the drawbacks is that it can be really reactive to other finishes. So if you want to do anything other than the lacquer, you better be careful because they don't respond well to other finishes. And everything has its own chemical components, and the ingredients make different changes. And so when you're dealing with lacquer, you're dealing with something that's kind of finicky about what it's willing to be around, something that's pretty finicky about what conditions it will work in. and something that takes a long time to dry. So you're just not going to find that in modern furniture. But what I'm refinishing here does have that because it's manufactured by a large organization. That furniture company did a lot, and they had the ability to use lacquer in a way that worked for them with the storage and the dry time necessary. And anyway, I'm not against lacquer, but it's just lacquer's against us. So we need to find different methods. Some of what you've seen has been entirely unrelated to the piece that I'm working on because it's a piece that I purchased and intended to work on, but decided that maybe it would be a better idea for me to try to sell it as is to another person that wants to work on furniture. I found it's a white fine furniture piece that you'll see, or maybe already have seen in the video, that's a dresser, and it's gorgeous, and the refinishing that it needs is kind of minor. It sells for quite a bit of money in any kind of condition, and I don't know if I'm willing to put the effort forth to improve the condition in order to sell it for more money, considering that I got it at a pretty low cost. So I went ahead and posted it as it is. And I hope someone will just buy it as it is and refinish it. These Henredon side tables, I got to the top drawer of one before it was real sticky. So I sanded the drawer down, I sanded the slides down, I added soap, and all of those things seem to help to an enormous extent. The next piece you're going to see is not in this video, but will be featured in one of the next videos. Two side tables that I made from vanities that had a lot of tannin bleed through, so shellac's going to be involved again. I'd like to face the challenges, and I'd like you to face them with me.